Don Knotts was dying, but no one knew it. The funniest constable on TV, who was 81, was hiding a dangerous secret from everyone, even Andy Griffith. His oxygen tank was hidden. He called off visits, even after reviving after flatlining in an ambulance. He refused to disclose the severity of the situation to his own children. The guy who spent 50 years making America laugh was caught in a web of falsehoods to keep his loved ones safe during his last days. However, that wasn't the most peculiar aspect of his enigmatic demise. Morgantown, West Virginia, was the birthplace of Don Knotts in 1924. He came 14 years after the last kid, and was the youngest of 4 brothers. His parents were already elderly and exhausted. Jesse Sr., his father, drank excessively and had schizophrenia. Since he was 5 years old, Don has lived in constant terror. He slept in the kitchen on a cot. He had to walk by his father every day, who would lie on the sofa in the living room. Jesse Sr. would seize Don during violent outbursts, push him up against a wall, and put a butcher knife to his neck. "I'll kill you, you son of a bitch," he would mutter. The harm had already been done when his father was twice sent to the West Virginia State Mental Hospital. Don suffered from persistent worry and sleeplessness throughout these formative years. He had a tense stomach and was constantly concerned about his health. Even as an adult, Don's father passed away in 1937. He was 13. In the same year, Don learnt about ventriloquism. It became his way out. He gathered enough money by 1939 to purchase a wooden dummy that he called Danny. He utilized the dummy to perform at churches and schools, and he practiced daily. When actual words were too difficult, he felt comfortable communicating through Danny. Together with his pals Richie Ferrara and Jarvis Eldred, he founded a small ensemble known as the Radio 3. They performed music and comedy, anywhere they were allowed to perform. Danny accompanied Don as he enlisted in the Army in 1943. He performed with the Special Services Unit in the Pacific Islands. He provided amusement to soldiers positioned close to battlegrounds. Even though he intended to quit using the fake in 1944, the Army urged him to continue. He therefore released Danny on a cargo assignment. The fake vanished into the sea. It was his method of letting go of the thing that had kept him alive during his early years. Growing up in Morgantown was difficult. Due to their inability to produce anything, the family abandoned their property in 1929. On University Avenue, they took up residence in a modest rented home. Elsie, his mother, earned money by taking in boarders and doing laundry. She occasionally had to evict young ladies from the residence while renting rooms to male college students. Don was thin and feeble. He was only 97 pounds. At school, he was frequently ill and harassed. He previously claimed to be stoop-shouldered and to have had little promise when he was born. The Army said he didn't weigh enough to serve when he was drafted in 1943. To enter, he needed a waiver. Nerves and little nutrients caused constant discomfort in his body. He never felt completely comfortable and frequently puked. Don was chosen as Morgantown High's senior class president in 1942. In addition, he was an usher at the Warner Theater and wrote a humorous column for the school newspaper. He appeared to be doing well and had a little performing ensemble. On the inside, though, he continued to feel unworthy. He recalled years later that those were anxious and self-conscious times. He grinned broadly, but he didn't think it was real. That sensation never truly parted from him. Don Knotts, just 18, had recently graduated from Morgantown, West Virginia, high school in 1942. He had performed ventriloquism and humor at school productions and neighborhood gatherings for years. He thought he was prepared for a greater challenge. He traveled to New York City by bus with a dream and a luggage. He believed he had what it takes to succeed in the entertainment industry. But he had a disastrous first audition. He wasn't just rejected by the casting director. He advised Don to give up completely. Don would never fit in with the entertainment industry, he said. He was devastated by just one statement. Later in the year, Don returned home. The town's residents had heard that he departed to pursue his goal. Now he came back empty-handed. He took the only job he could find, which made matters worse. He began picking hens at a supermarket. The work was filthy and difficult. He had cuts and swollen hands. He was in feathers and blood for hours every day. He was reminded of what he had lost by each foul. This was one of the worst moments of his life, he subsequently remarked. The war was in full force in 1943. Don was slender and little. He weighed barely 110 pounds, and was 5'6". Many people believed he would not be drafted. However, he was taken in by the Army, and sent to the 6,817th Special Services Battalion. He was supposed to amuse the soldiers. He became a member of Stars and Gripes. They gave performances close to areas of active conflict in the Western Pacific. Don brought Danny Hooch Matador, his dummy. They made troops laugh together. Comedian Red Ford approached Don one evening after a performance and remarked, "You're a funny little son of a bitch." That moment meant the world to Don. For the first time, someone in the company had faith in him. He was promoted to Technician Grade 5 by 1946. He received the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 4 bronze stars and the World War II Victory Medal. The Army gave him something he had lost, though, more than the decorations. It offered him hope. Catherine K. Metz was married in December 1947. She was the daughter of a minister. Don had been a student at West Virginia University when they first met. In 1948, he received his degree. He was employed at a Morgantown department store the next year. Toys were his specialty. Don was advised to give New York another chance by the man dressed as Santa Claus at the store one day. Don paid attention. He asked his brother for a $100 loan. In 1949, he and Kay returned to Manhattan with a total of only $120. The plan didn't work out. Don tried out for radio positions. Again and again he was denied. He failed at his act. His jokes didn't work, but he was selected by Arthur Godfrey's talent scouts. Not even his ventriloquism received much notice. To make ends meet, he took on side employment. Despite meeting with the William Morris Agency, he was unable to get employment. For 7 years, the rejection persisted. At last, in 1956, a shift occurred. Don was chosen to star in No Time for Sergeants, a Broadway production. Although it wasn't a major factor, it made him known. More significantly, he got to know Andy Griffith, a young actor. His career would be shaped by that encounter. Knotts was naturally gifted at tense humor, but it wasn't a sudden gift. He had witnessed a guest speaker at a luncheon months prior quake, tremor, and spill water during his whole speech. It was humorous as well as unpleasant. That picture stayed with him. He later remembered it in a dream. From then, he developed a jittery, nervous figure that would later win over millions of fans. In the Man on the Street segments on the Steve Allen program, which aired from 1956 to 1961, Don played the role of Mr. Morrison. Morrison once put pins in hand grenades as part of his hazardous duties. "Kaboom," he mumbled, when Steve Allen inquired what his initials stood for. The audiences adored it. "Are you nervous?" Allen would inquire, and Knotts, who was obviously collapsing, would yell, "No." He became renowned because of that bit. However, Knotts needed a job in 1960, since the Steve Allen Show was coming to an end. He conceived an idea after seeing the Andy Griffith Show pilot, which had aired as a Danny Thomas Show episode. He grabbed his phone and dialed Andy. "A tiny town sheriff most likely requires a constable," he informed him. Everything changed with just one phrase. Griffith concurred and instructed him to give Sheldon Leonard, the producer, a call. In addition to giving Knott a job, that one phone conversation helped establish the core of the entire program. Griffith was first intended to be the comedy. As they had done on stage, Knotts would portray the straight man. However, after just one episode was filmed, Griffith changed his mind. He understood that if he played it straight, and let Don handle the jokes, the show would be stronger. Griffith subsequently stated that it was the decisive factor. In order to give Don more room to shine, he backed off and softened his accent. This decision made Barney Fife one of the most recognizable characters in TV history, and transformed the program into a classic. Barney Fife is a well-constructed Knotts. He walked stiffly and spoke in a loud voice, and an odd sort of swagger. Not only was he anxious, but he was also innocent. Like a toddler, he expressed his feelings without speaking. Barney made everything up, because he had unintentionally shot his gun too frequently into the ceiling. He kept one bullet in his shirt pocket rather than in the gun. Although he considered himself a hero, he was consistently mistaken. According to Barney, there are 3 reasons why crime is so low in Mayberry. Together, Andy and Baby form 3. Barney's false confidence was encapsulated in the phrase. Don Knotts won 5 Emmy Awards for his portrayal of Barney Fife between 1961 and 1967. Between 1961 and 1963, he won 3 straight, followed by victories in 1966 and 1967. He defeated some of the biggest names in Hollywood, such as Robert Redford and George C. Scott. He wasn't supposed to be the humorous one at first, but after that, he became the focal point of the performance. However, Don Knotts was suffering in silence as America laughed. He was having marital problems with Catherine Metz, his undergraduate sweetheart from West Virginia University. At her father's church, they were married in 1947. Their 17-year marriage was finished by 1964, when he received his 3rd Emmy. Thomas and Karen were their 2 children. Later, Karen said that back in the 1950s, her mother had persuaded Don to attend treatment. Long before anybody else did, she realized the suffering that underlies the humor. Don fought against more than just marital issues. He frequently stayed up all night before filming since he suffered from terrible sleeplessness. He was always concerned about his health. He would be dragged down for days by waves of despair. Doctors prescribed him anti-anxiety drugs in the 1950s. He developed an addiction. Karen remembered that her father was erratic in his emotions, and that he occasionally got caught up in a vicious cycle of pessimistic thoughts, from which he was unable to break free. He unintentionally took too many sleeping tablets one night. He was ultimately forced to face his addiction after that fright, and an ultimatum from his 3rd wife. He never found therapy easy. He was brought up by a devoutly religious father who battled alcoholism and schizophrenia. Don had a lot of remorse and terror as a youngster. In an attempt to release the burden of the history, he yelled, "Fuck you, God," during one session in the 1950s. The hard road to recovery began with that discovery. Later, he located a psychiatrist in California, and he continued to visit him throughout his life. According to his daughter, he was able to overcome the trauma, although it took some time. He still battled with his true identity, despite all of his celebrity. Although he had made a living by portraying weak guys, he had accomplished things in real life that very few people ever do. Millions of people adored him, yet he frequently felt undeserving of their affection. According to Andy Griffith, Don was the funniest man he had ever met, even more hilarious off-screen than on film. Don said, "Barney was not a happy man. I am and I love it," when asked how he differed from Barney Fife. However, it wasn't always the case. He still felt like a failure sometimes. Occasionally, the guy who brought laughter to the entire nation was only attempting to reconcile with himself. Don Knotts believed the Andy Griffith Show was ending in late 1964. He felt it was time to go on after portraying Barney Fife for 5 seasons. Lew Wasserman, the president of Universal Studios, made contact at this time. Earlier that year, Wasserman had seen Knotts in the film The Incredible Mr. Limpet. He thought Knotts had genuine movie star potential. He gave him complete creative authority over a 5-film pact. Knotts would have the freedom to select his own authors and projects. By October of 1965, the agreement was completed. Universal pledged to produce at least 1 film with Knotts each year. The arrangement was significantly more lucrative than his pay on television. His annual salary on The Andy Griffith Show was around $35,000. That amounted to $1,250 per every episode. However, things changed shortly after Knotts signed the deal. Andy Griffith declared that he will continue the show for another 2 or 3 years. He was given $1 million a year by CBS to stay. Knotts was taken aback. Universal was already his commitment. Daniel DeVise's book Andy and Don claims that CBS made an effort to retain him. It was too late when they promised him a rise to $150,000 annually. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, his debut film with Universal, was already in development. The film was an unexpected smash when it was released in January 1966. The production cost was $670,000. It became one of Universal's best-selling films of that year. Luther Heggs, portrayed by Knott, is a timid typesetter who stays overnight in a haunted mansion to establish his journalistic credentials. One of Knott's greatest mistakes in his career occurred in 1969. In the film The Love God, he played the role of Abner Peacock IV, a reserved birdwatcher who unintentionally ends himself leading an adult magazine. Nat Hiken wrote and directed the movie. It was intended to be a parody of the 1960s shifting views on sexuality. Hiken attempted to make Knotts resemble Hugh Hefner, starring performers like Tony Curtis and Rock Hudson. The movie tended more towards romantic comedies. Knotts didn't seem to belong. The tone of the narrative was not reflected in his apprehensive and naive approach. According to reports, Doris Day rejected the movie because it was too explicit. The audiences were perplexed. Family humor was what they had anticipated. Like Dr. Strangelove, the movie attempted to be audacious and clever, but it failed. In the end, it was one of his few big flops as a filmmaker. Even when he was successful, Knotts had regrettable moments. He claimed to have made the most embarrassing error of his career in 1981 while filming Three's Company. He was watching a Dodgers vs. Expos playoff game in his dressing room. The game was enormous. The World Series would host the victor. Knott had intended to just check the score at breaks, but he became so engrossed in the game that he failed to see his one and only stage appearance. A live audience saw the show while it was being taped. He had to be hurried inside his room by the stage manager to inform him that the filming must end. He had never missed a cue before, according to Knott's memoir Barney Fife and Other Characters I Have Known. "I've never felt smaller in my life," he added. The Dodgers' victory over the Yankees in the 1981 World Series was the only thing that cheered him up. Disney followed. Knott and Tim Conway co-starred in The Apple Dumpling Gang in July 1975. The film was directed by Norman Tocure and was based on a Jack Bickham novel. It took place in California in 1879. Conway portrayed Amos Tucker, while Knotts portrayed Theodore Ogilvy. The hash knife outfit consisted of two bumbling bandits. They joined forces with Bill Bixby, a gambler who ends up taking care of three orphans who find riches. Although it cost a lot more to create than his other comedies, the film brought in $36,853,000. As a result, it was among Disney's best-performing live-action pictures of the decade. Roger Ebert gave the cast of the movie high marks. He claimed that there was always something going on when Tim Conway, Don Knotts, John McGiver, Slim Pickens, and Harry Morgan were all on screen. Knotts and Conway had such a great rapport that they went back to do the Apple Dumpling Gang rides in 1979. Together they would go on to star in a number of subsequent films. These films sustained Knotts' career and helped bring him to a younger audience. After Don Knotts was fired from CBS, where he had won 5 Emmys for the Andy Griffith program, NBC offered him his own variety show in 1970. The network anticipated a hit and pledged a 22-week run. However, the Don Knotts show had trouble right from the beginning. It was unable to compete with major shows like The Mod Squad and The Carol Burnett Show, even with guests like Andy Griffith and Florence Henderson. Producers brought in new writers, Bob Sweeney and Gary Berghoff, who had previously directed Knotts halfway through the season. Nothing was helpful. Don struggled every week, according to actress Elaine Joyce, who declined a part on the Carol Burnett program to join him. The ratings remained poor. He traveled to Hawaii after the cancellation and slept in bed for a week, too distraught to move. His career returned 9 years later. He became Ralph Furley, the new landlord for Three's business, in 1979. For a spin-off, the original landlords had departed, and Knotts took over. The cast was first anxious. According to John Ritter, they were hesitant to collaborate with someone so well-known, but Knotts won them over. He sported colorful escots, flamboyant shirts, and outrageous outfits. He portrayed Ralph as clumsy and overconfident, constantly seeking romance, but never quite succeeding. Writers handed Knotts Suzanne Summers lines. When she departed the show in 1981, viewers adored him, and his role grew even larger. A health scare followed. Knott was diagnosed with macular degeneration at the age of 57. His eyesight became blurry, making it difficult for him to read, drive, or identify faces. Panic was his first thought. He dreaded the end of his career. He could continue working, the doctor said, but it would need more work. Depression ensued. One day, however, he reminded himself that a blind person would do everything to preserve his remaining vision. His power came from that concept. He saw people adjusting to life without sight at the Braille Institute in Los Angeles. Their bravery enabled him to continue. However, his marriage was impacted by the stress. In 1974, he wed Laura Lee Chuchna. He entered crisis mode following the diagnosis. He began pursuing whatever he believed he may lose. According to Laura Lee, they became increasingly distant as his sadness worsened. In 1983, they got divorced. She then stated that the last straw for him was his fear of losing his sight. Knott's sight was eventually salvaged via surgery. He was unable to drive or read scripts prior to then. Then he returned to acting and swimming. He made an appearance in Pleasantville in 1998 as an enigmatic TV repairman who assisted two teenagers in navigating a 1950s setting. For someone who had survived the heyday of television and been given a second shot, it was the ideal part. He was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2000. 7083 Hollywood Boulevard was the address. John Ritter and Andy Griffith were present for the event. Gary Owens and Louis Nye. At 75, Knotts was still operating. As his vision deteriorated in his latter years, he began working as a voice actor. He provided the voice of Night of 100 Frights, a character in the video game Scooby-Doo. In 2002, he and Tim Conway collaborated on Hermie and Friends in 2003, a collaboration that continued until his passing. He provided the voice of Mayor Turkey Lurkey in Disney's Chicken Little in 2005, when he was 81. To capture Knott's apprehensive charm, animator Dick Zondag studied hours of his performances. As befitted a man whose career started as a nervous constable, his last role was voicing a dog named Sniffer in the 2006 film Air Buddies. When Don married Frances Yarborough in 2002, he fell in love once more. On the set of What a Country, they had first met in 1987. He had learnt lines from her. She referred to him as a kindred spirit, despite their different ages. They remained close until the very end of the 1994 play, in which they co-starred. Throughout his life, Don Knotts made people laugh. However, he was quietly struggling for every breath in the last years of his life. He was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, a condition that gradually impairs lung function at the age of 80. Doctors gave him another terrible blow a short while later. Lung cancer was his condition. He had stopped smoking more than 10 years prior to this. Already the harm was done. In the early years of his career, smoking was widespread in Hollywood. It was ingrained in the society. For many, including himself, it was too late by the time the dangers were evident. Don continued to work despite the worsening of his illness. Even though he was obviously having trouble breathing, he continued to play Mayor Turkey Lurkey in Disney's Chicken Little in 2005. In Las Vegas, he also appeared on That 70s Show. He had supper with his longtime buddy Andy Griffith that year, right before Christmas. Griffith immediately observed Don's labored breathing, but he remained silent that evening. Rather, he subsequently phoned Francie, Don's wife, and informed her that something was up. Don had already decided on something. He intended to conceal his ailment. Francie and a few close pals were among the few who were aware. He kept it a secret from Andy. He was aware that he may cease if the news got out, obtaining employment. At his age, an actor who is ill would not get cast. He continued to attempt to safeguard his career. For this reason, he declined Andy's Christmas visit, stating that it wasn't a good time. In actuality, he felt ashamed of his need for air. That was not how he wanted others to see him. He also didn't want his kids to understand the gravity of the situation. He didn't tell them the worst of it. Even as the illness worsened when treatment began, He had faith that he would defeat it. He didn't want to be seen as someone who gave up, since he had always had optimism. He had previously experienced a lot, according to his daughter Karen, including an abusive father, a difficult upbringing, and brothers who were alcoholics. However, he had consistently delivered. He desired to repeat the action, but everything changed in February 2006. Don suffered a heart collapse in the ambulance on the 24th, while being transported to UCLA Medical Center. His heart had ceased beating. He was revived by paramedics en route to the hospital. His family was eventually informed about the situation by doctors. The doctor informed Francie that Don had flatlined in the ambulance but had been brought back, according to Andy Griffith, who was there at the hospital. Don's loved ones were able to spend a bit extra time with him because of that emergency situation. It was a moment they will always remember. Don continued to remain humorous during those final hours. Karen claimed that her father made her laugh so hard, she had to leave the room as she was sitting beside his bed. It seemed unreal. He was dying. He still possessed that innate talent though. Both Karen and her stepmother went into hysterics when he uttered something so hilarious. Later, Karen felt bad for leaving the room. She laughed out when a director friend told her, "You should have stayed, comedians thrive on it." Don was joyful all the way to the end. Andy Griffith sat beside him that same day. Although their relationship had lasted for decades, they hadn't been as close in recent years. Their relationship remained constant throughout their time together, from the Andy Griffith program in the 1960s to their subsequent collaboration on Matlock. Andy remained in the medical facility until around 6:30 p.m. At 11 p.m. that evening, Don passed away. Andy leaned in and said, "I love you," as their time together came to an end. "Breathe, breathe, keep breathing, Jess," he added. Jesse was Don's true name, and he never liked it. However, Andy had always referred to him as such. One of the few individuals Don would let use it. He knew only the closest of friends could share that moment. When Don and Andy came together, according to those who knew them, it seemed like no time had gone. As if they were still on set, they would joke, sing and laugh. They had a genuine relationship that lasted a lifetime. Andy's visit to the patient's bed was ultimately more than a farewell. Two guys who had improved each other's lives and the lives of millions of others via laughing exchanged a final thank you.